Hey guys, tonight we slip barefoot across cool marble floors under the flicker of lamplight, the scent of wine and sandalwood clinging to the air. The palace is vast, quiet in some corners, but here, where the shadows gather, it's alive with murmurs, the rustle of silk, and the faint, knowing laughter of people who think the night belongs to them. You're in Rome, the empire at its glittering height, yet this place feels less like a seat of government and more like a stage where charm is the currency, and every glance is an invitation or a warning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail behind a senator who walks as if he belongs here, though the truth is, in MESALINA's presence, no one is entirely in control. She doesn't just greet her guests, she claims them. The way she tilts her head, the almost lazy curve of her smile, the casual brush of her fingers on an arm as she passes, it's all carefully measured, and yet it feels dangerous. There's a saying in Rome that beauty is like fire. It warms, it dazzles, and if you're not careful, it eats you alive. MESALINA has built an entire palace wing on that principle. Historians still argue whether she truly was the embodiment of unrestrained lust that later writers claimed, or whether much of it was the product of political enemies sharpening their pens. But what's undeniable is her skill. How she could take something as fleeting as a momentary glance and spin it into leverage. The men who entered these chambers didn't just leave with a memory. They left owing her, in ways they'd only realize when she called in the favor. The quirky thing is, in the daytime, the same corridors now filled with subdued laughter and the glint of bracelets would be lined with sober-faced petitioners, their scrolls tucked under arms, hoping for an audience with the emperor. Yet Claudius, her husband, was often elsewhere, absorbed in affairs of state, or so distracted by scholarly pursuits that the real affairs happened under his nose. One senator famously remarked that MESALINA could outvote the Senate without ever setting foot inside it, which is both flattering and alarming, depending on where you stood. You notice the blend of luxury and tension in the room. The couches are draped in dyed fabrics worth more than a soldier's yearly pay. The air tastes faintly of pomegranate and cinnamon. Every conversation is hushed, yet every laugh too loud for the hour. MESALINA moves between clusters of guests like a dancer stepping through choreography no one else can hear. One fringe tidbit that tends to get buried in the grand scandal. MESALINA reportedly kept a tiny garden of rare lilies just outside these chambers, not for beauty alone, but because she claimed their scent was a test for visitors. If you wrinkled your nose at the heavy perfume, she'd know you weren't her kind of company. If you inhaled deeply, she'd mark you as a potential player in her inner circle. Whether this was true or just one of those palace legends, well, you can almost smell the lilies now, so maybe it doesn't matter. You find yourself wondering, if this is how she greets senators, scholars, and visiting dignitaries, what happens when someone actually resists her charm? The answer is, not much resistance survives. A patrician could refuse an invitation, yes, but in Rome, saying no to the empress was like tossing away a golden coin just to make a point. Foolish and costly. And perhaps, in her own way, she made that coin worth far more than it was. The night deepens, and the lamplight grows softer. MESALINA is now seated at the center of the room, drawing people in as naturally as a flame draws moths. You watch her lean in to whisper something to the man beside her, his face shifting from wary to amused to utterly captivated in less than a minute. You realize she's not just entertaining. She's setting traps, velvet-lined and scented, where the cost of escape is far higher than the cost of staying. Rome, for all its laws and moral decrees, was a place that could forgive almost anything if you had the right allies and could keep the public entertained. MESALINA seemed to understand this better than most. She turned her beauty into a kind of shield, her wit into a dagger, and her proximity to the emperor into a crown heavier than gold. In a city where statues outlasted the men they honored, perhaps MESALINA was building something else entirely. Not legacy, not love, but influence, raw and immediate. And tonight, here in these perfumed halls, you're standing in the middle of it. Whether you leave untouched or tangled in silk, well, that's a choice you probably lost the moment you stepped inside. The scent changes first. You notice it as the sun dips and the torches along the outer colonnade are lit, amber smoke curling upward, carrying the sharper tang of incense meant to signal that the night belongs to her. The guests who remain are not here by accident. They're hand-picked, either too powerful to refuse or too eager to be chosen. You follow the stream of bodies, draped in purple hems and clinking jewelry, toward the inner wing where the rules of the city fade away like the echo of a closing door. Here, MESALINA's chambers shed their polite face entirely. The couches are lower, arranged not for conversation but for lounging. Curtains hang in thick folds, hiding alcoves where murmurs blur into shadows. You're aware of a shift in the atmosphere, less courtly, more transactional. Tonight, the Empress is not just a hostess. She's the center of an alleged marketplace that no ledger will ever record. Historians still argue whether the so-called palace brothel ever truly existed, or if it was a product of jealous slander. Roman moralists, after all, adored tales that confirmed their suspicions about the corruption of the elite. But step through this doorway now, and you understand why the legend refuses to die. The room hums with a strange blend of eagerness and unease. Senators, some of them gray-haired veterans of a dozen campaigns, linger at the edge of velvet divans. Merchants from distant provinces sit straighter, speaking carefully, as if every word could tip them closer to a favor, or further from it. MESALINA, draped in a fabric so fine it might as well be liquid, moves with deliberate ease. She greets a man you recognize from the forum, a fierce debater on legal reforms, now reduced to fumbling over a goblet in her presence. She offers him not just a smile, but the kind of eye contact that feels like a signature on an invisible contract. The exchange is over in seconds, but you can tell he's already marked. The quirky detail here, the kind that sticks in the mind, is the rumor that MESALINA kept a locked chest by her couch, filled not with gold or jewels, but with personal tokens from visitors. A ring slipped from a finger, a strip of embroidered cloth, even a scrap of parchment with an in-joke scrawled on it. Some claimed she collected them as trophies. Others whispered she used them as leverage. Either way, the chest was said to be heavy. You watch her move from guest to guest, and it becomes clear this is more than indulgence. It's choreography. A laugh here, a brush of the hand there, a question whispered too softly for you to catch. The transactions are invisible, but they're happening. Not in coins, but in loyalty, information, and the quiet promise of future returns. Rome, officially, frowned on prostitution for citizens of high rank. But unofficially, if you were the empress and the palace was yours to command, the law had a way of looking the other way, especially when the emperor himself seemed not to notice. Claudius, they said, was absorbed in grain supply logistics or in reading obscure histories, while his wife allegedly turned his home into the most exclusive, unrecorded market in the empire. The fringe tidbit you might appreciate. Some ancient writers claimed MESALINA would compete with professional courtesans, wagering she could entertain more clients in a single night than they could in their busiest season. Whether it's pure invention or exaggerated truth, the story fits the larger pattern. A woman playing a game no one else dared, and winning simply because no one could imagine the empress would stoop so low. You drift toward the wall, where the cool marble offers relief from the thick, perfumed air. Conversations brush past you like moth wings. One man mutters about a shipment of Egyptian grain delayed at Ostia. Another, more carefully, hints at a rival in the Senate whose vote might be swayed with the right encouragement. MESALINA is the constant between them, the silent hub of this wheel of wants. It's not just pleasure she's selling here, if selling is even the right word. It's access to her, to influence, to a network so tangled that a single night in these chambers could ripple through Roman politics for months. You imagine the city outside, the cold stone streets, the flicker of oil lamps in tenement windows, utterly unaware of the commerce taking place here in whispers and glances, and you realize something else. Everyone in this room is complicit. Whether they believe the rumors or dismiss them as scandalous invention, they're here. And that alone is enough to make the story real. The hours stretch, the laughter grows warmer, and MESALINA seems tireless. She pauses only to sip from a silver cup, the liquid catching torchlight in a flash of crimson. You can't tell if it's wine or pomegranate juice, and you're not sure it matters. Her gaze is sharp, even when her posture is languid, her mind clearly keeping score while her body plays hostess. The brothel may be legend, but the power is tangible. And as you lean back against the wall, you suspect that even if the historians stripped away every exaggeration, the truth would still be just as dangerous, perhaps more so. By now, the palace has shed any lingering pretense of restraint. The outer halls lie quiet and empty, their sentries exchanging bored glances while, deep inside, the heart of the imperial residence beats faster with gossip, laughter, and the low murmur of voices that carry just far enough to be overheard. It's here, in these inner rooms, that Rome's greatest currency, reputation, is minted and spent without a single coin changing hands. The marble walls seem to hum with it. Every tapestry, every bronze oil lamp, every polished statue becomes an unblinking witness to MESALINA's parade of conquests. She doesn't hide them. On the contrary, she parades them like a general showing off captured standards. That senator from earlier, now seated closer to her, leaning forward as if she's about to whisper the answer to the universe's most dangerous question. A merchant from the provinces? She lets him linger at the edge of her couch, half ignored, until his longing becomes part of the performance. Historians still argue whether MESALINA truly flaunted her affairs or whether later chroniclers sharpened the image for moral outrage. Ancient Rome loved to condemn with flair. The more brazen the sin, the more delicious the story. Yet even the most cautious accounts agree. She didn't live in fear of discovery. Why would she? Her husband, Emperor Claudius, seemed oblivious, and those who might have warned him often found themselves distracted by favors owed, debts forgiven, or quiet threats murmured behind silk curtains, a quirky little detail often lost in the grand scandal. There are scattered references to MESALINA keeping a tame nightingale in her chambers, a bird trained to mimic snippets of conversation. Imagine it, a winged gossip collector, chirping fragments of last night's intrigues to amused guests in the morning. Whether it's fact or embellishment, it fits the tone of a woman who understood that half the power of a rumor lies in its retelling. You pass a group of younger patricians clustered near a pillar, speaking in quick, conspiratorial bursts. They're trading names, pairing them with gestures toward the Empress, tallying her recent victories as though it's a gladiatorial score. And she knows. Of course she knows. The sly upward flicker of her eyes in their direction is pure theater. There's a subtle arrogance in her movements tonight, a kind of dare woven into every step. It's as if she's telling the moralists of Rome, "Go on, try to stop me." And the beauty of it, if beauty is the word, is that none of them can. The same senators who might condemn her in public are here in the candlelight, part of the show, their presence an unspoken endorsement. Rome's marble is cold, but this room is warm, with the press of bodies, the scent of wine and roasted dates, the occasional sharp bite of spiced oil from a nearby platter. You hear laughter burst from an alcove, sharp and sudden, followed by the rustle of curtains. Somewhere else, two men are speaking urgently, one shaking his head while the other gestures toward MESALINA, as if she were both the problem and the solution to his troubles. It's here that the gossip multiplies, feeding on itself like a fire catching on dry laurel leaves. You catch fragments. A governor's nephew promised a magistrate's seat. A widow rumored to have been recruited into the Empress's service. A poet who will immortalize her charms in verses sly enough to evade censors. These stories, real or imagined, leave the palace and seep into the city. By the time they reach the taverns and forums, they'll be embroidered into something unrecognizable. But the name MESALINA will be there, gleaming like a coin passed from hand to hand. The fringe tidbit here is almost absurd. One satirist claimed MESALINA had the palace gardeners weave her name into the topiary shrubs in the courtyard, just so visiting dignitaries would be greeted with it in greenery. Most likely nonsense, but in this atmosphere, it's easy to believe. You lean against a doorway, the cool bronze fittings pressing into your shoulder, and watch her pivot the room around herself. She doesn't simply entertain, she curates attention. If she wants someone noticed, she'll draw the eyes of others toward them with a glance or a remark. If she wants someone forgotten, she'll let silence swallow them until they might as well not exist. This is politics disguised as indulgence, strategy dressed in silk. It's dangerous, of course. Every empire has its limits, even Rome, and the higher you stand, the sharper the wind. But tonight, there's no hint she believes the fall will come. Why should she? Her name is in the air, in the wine, in the laughter. Even those who despise her speak it. The moralists may whisper their condemnations, but they too are part of the echo. You realize something else. In Messalina's Rome, scandal isn't a side effect. It's the engine. It keeps her relevant, feared, and desired in equal measure. Without it, she would be merely an empress. With it, she becomes the story everyone is telling. And tonight, you're standing right in the middle of that story, the marble walls closing in as if to keep the sound from escaping. Though you know it will, carried by the voices of every guest here. The night stretches on, and the palace begins to feel like a living thing. Its breath, the steady hum of voices. Its pulse, the echo of footsteps crossing mosaic floors. You've been here long enough to sense the change. It's subtle, like the first chill in the air before a storm. Messalina still moves with her signature ease, still bends the room toward her, but there's something taut behind the glint in her eyes now. A guest arrives late, his expression tight, his robe travel creased. He greets no one but her, and their exchange is brief. You can't hear the words, but you feel the shift. Her smile stiffens just enough to notice. Around you, the laughter continues, yet there's an undercurrent, a low thrum of tension that wasn't there before. In a place built on secrets, the smallest tremor can be the start of an earthquake. Historians still argue whether Messalina's final downfall came from one scandal too many or from enemies waiting for the perfect moment. The legend goes that she became reckless, believing herself untouchable. Perhaps she had to. How else could she survive so long in a court where survival was an art form? But tonight, the line between control and excess is starting to blur. The quirky detail, in some accounts, is almost cinematic. During her last days of influence, she supposedly commissioned a set of golden dice, claiming she would roll her fate when the mood struck her. Whether they were ever used or existed at all is uncertain, but the image lingers. The Empress treating destiny as a game she couldn't lose. You watch as she waves a servant forward, dismissing the late arriving guest with a tilt of her chin. She turns back to her nearest companions, laughing at some remark, but you can tell her mind is elsewhere. There's a flicker in her gaze toward the door, as though she's measuring who has left the room and who remains. Outside these inner halls, the political winds are shifting. Claudius's advisors, once indulgent or silent, have begun to mutter. The Senate, long accustomed to her games, is losing patience. And enemies, many of them men she has outmaneuvered, are finding one another in whispered alliances. The guests tonight don't see it, or they pretend not to. They drink, they trade favors, they bask in her attention. But you can sense the fragility under the shine. A woman like Messalina thrives on motion. The moment the dance stops, the walls close in. And somewhere in the city, someone is already writing the first lines of her ending. The fringe tidbit that threads into this moment. An old court servant, decades later, claimed that on the very night before her arrest, Messalina stood at a balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens and asked, "Do you hear it? The silence before the dogs are loosed?" It's impossible to verify, but the phrase has the ring of someone who knew the rules of the hunt and felt the hounds drawing near. It comes swiftly when it comes. One day, she's the Empress who can bend senators into knots with a glance. The next, she's a liability too dangerous to keep. Her allies vanish. Her laughter dies in the marble corridors, and the palace's scented air turns cold. By the time Claudius hears the full weight of the accusations, the decision is no longer his alone to make. In the end, there's no grand audience, no trial that gives her a final chance to dazzle or deflect. Only a small, controlled scene away from the public eye. Some say she begged, others that she faced it in silence. Rome records the fact of her death, but leaves the tone to rumor. And now the palace is quiet. The curtains hang still, the couch is empty. Those who once crowded her chambers avoid them. The marble walls no longer hum. They listen as if the memory of her voice still lingers, daring anyone to speak her name too loudly. The air cools, and the torches along the colonnade burn lower, their flames bending gently in the night's breath. You step out into the courtyard, where the moonlight washes the gardens in pale silver. The lilies, whether hers or simply a memory stitched from the stories, stand motionless, their scent faint but lingering. The city beyond the palace sleeps. Somewhere in the streets, a merchant shifts in his bed. A soldier turns over and dreams of home. A poet scribbles by lamplight. Rome's heartbeat is steady again, untroubled by the rise and fall of one empress's fortunes. You walk slowly now, your footsteps soft against the worn stone, and the noise of the night fades until all you hear is the faint trickle of a fountain. The shadows here are deep, but they hold no threat, only the quiet weight of history. It's easy to imagine that if you paused long enough, you might hear the ghost of laughter drifting from a distant corridor, or catch the whisper of silk moving past. But the palace is still. MESALINA's world, so vivid and alive only hours ago, has folded into the hush. The scandals, the daring, the tangled web of favors, they're just echoes now, carried away by time. All that remains is the cool night air, the dim glow of the last lamps, and the steady rhythm of your breathing as the weight of the story settles. You linger for a moment more, then turn toward the gates, leaving the palace to its silence. And as the first faint blush of dawn touches the horizon, the memory of MESALINA drifts into the same pale light, softened, distant, and finally at rest. You can almost hear the dust settling now, the way it does in a room left untouched for years. The air is warm, still, patient. You're drifting further, letting the world outside dissolve like smoke. Every moment here feels older than the last. Let's keep going, slow and quiet, into the next shadow of the past. We step into the marble-slicked world of Rome's most powerful women, where every footstep echoes under ceilings so high they feel like their own sky. You smell orange blossom drifting from the courtyard, hear the faint splash of a fountain tucked somewhere behind a wall of ivy, and feel the cool floor biting through your sandals. It's gorgeous, overwhelming, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this life unless you can master the art of smiling politely while someone casually poisons your social standing over lunch. You push open the heavy bronze doors, their hinges sighing like an old storyteller who has seen far too much. Light spills in from a peristyle court, where marble columns frame a rectangle of sky, and the air smells faintly of rosemary planted in perfect symmetry. This is no simple home. It's a stage set for power. Roman imperial women didn't just live in palaces. They inhabited symbols. The marble beneath your feet, likely imported from the quarries of Numidia or Greece. Each block's journey as expensive and political as a senatorial campaign. Servants move around you like clockwork, each carrying trays, textiles, or scrolls without a sound, because here, silence is part of the decor. The floors shimmer with intricate mosaics, dolphins leaping over waves, wine cups overflowing, mythic lovers frozen mid-embrace. Some historians still argue whether these designs reflected the women's personal taste or the emperor's propaganda. Tiny tiles doubling as a PR campaign. You turn into the atrium, the heart of the palace. The impluvium, a shallow pool at the center, collects rainwater that's guided here from the roof. It's purely functional, yet lined with carved stone that could have paid for an entire legion's annual salary. A quirky tidbit. Some palaces had floors inlaid with bits of colored glass to catch the sunlight and make the whole room shimmer like a shallow sea. It's the kind of flex that says, we don't need magic, we have money. As you wander farther, you pass through tablinums, formal reception rooms where foreign envoys might be ushered in for an audience with the emperor's wife or mother. You imagine Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, here, seated in an ivory chair, her robe pleated with precision, her expression warm but unreadable. This is the kind of space where words are weapons, and one eyebrow raised in the wrong moment can shift the course of an imperial appointment. A side corridor leads you into a triclinium, the formal dining hall. The walls are drenched in deep red frescoes, Pompeian red, the kind that seems to pulse in candlelight. You can almost hear the rustle of silk as guests recline on couches, nibbling olives imported from Baetica and figs from Egypt. Here's another little fact. Roman banquets sometimes featured edible silver leaf, a garnish purely to prove you could afford to waste it. The scale of the place is dizzying. Even private corridors feel like ceremonial processions. Arches framed with gilded moldings, ceilings painted with gods gliding through clouds. Every surface competes for your attention, and yet, for the women here, this is just home. They wake up to this. They hold casual chats about the weather against backdrops more elaborate than modern wedding venues. You step into a portico leading to the gardens. The air shifts, cooler, heavier with jasmine and bay laurel. Marble statues line the walkway, each representing gods, virtues, or dead relatives that need constant political remembrance. The fish pond glimmers in the center, home to exotic species brought from across the empire. And yes, it's true. Some Roman elites kept moray eels as pets, a fact that feels both regal and unsettling. The palace's layout is a study in controlled movement. Public spaces flow seamlessly into semi-private ones, where you might bump into a senator's wife or a visiting queen before melting into the truly private suites. It's like a labyrinth designed for intrigue. If you don't know the route, you'll wander forever, smelling incense trails that lead you nowhere. Your hand brushes against a wall, inlaid with tiny squares of lapis lazuli. Its deep blue gleam, a reminder that even stone here is more valuable than livestock. You wonder how many lives and trades were tangled in this one surface. It's the kind of thought that makes you slow your pace, feeling the centuries press in from all sides. The last thing you notice before the corridor turns is a pair of doors carved with scenes of goddesses. Juno with her peacock, Venus rising from the sea. They're not just decoration, they're statements. This palace and the women within are bound up with divine imagery, deliberately blurring the line between mortal influence and heavenly authority. You step through, your sandals whispering on the polished stone, deeper into the heart of their world. You follow the cool stone path until it opens into a private chamber where morning sunlight spills across polished floors, striking a gilded mirror taller than you. The day here begins not with alarm clocks, but with the soft pad of servant footsteps and the rustle of linen curtains being drawn aside. Imperial women do not simply wake up. They are awakened gently in a ritual as layered as their silk gowns. A handmaiden brings a shallow bronze basin, steam curling upward from warm water scented with rose petals. You sit, or rather, you're seated, on a cushioned chair, while another servant drapes a robe over your shoulders. The air smells faintly of frankincense, because apparently, smelling divine is as important as looking it. And here's your first mainstream fact of the day. Roman cosmetics were serious business. Imperial women's morning routine could involve powdered lead for whitening the skin. Terrible idea. Crushed beetles for rouge, and coal imported from Egypt for dramatic eyeliner. Historians still argue whether these beauty trends were personal preference or calculated political theater, designed to project stability and opulence. The hairdresser arrives next, armed with bone combs, bronze pins, and a patience forged by years of untangling ambitious curls. You may have heard of the tutulus, a towering, braided style, but palace women often preferred the nodus, a signature of Livia's era, where the hair was parted in the middle, waved, and rolled into a bun at the back. And if the style was complex, well, there was always a slave trained specifically for that, much like modern-day celebrity stylists. A quirky tidbit: some styles were so gravity-defying they required a frame of wire hidden underneath, essentially a hair scaffolding. Once dressed, you step into the gallery where the empress might receive morning visitors, family members, palace officials, perhaps an ambassador's wife, bringing news or gossip from afar. These meetings are polite, but strategic. A comment on the weather might segue into an opinion about tax reforms in a distant province. Your posture, your choice of necklace, even the citrus scent lingering on your gown, all of it says something to those who know how to read it. Late morning often brings a visit to the lararium, the household shrine. You stand before small statues of the household gods, offering a pinch of incense. This is less about deep faith and more about keeping tradition intact, because breaking tradition in the palace is like skipping the Queen's Christmas speech. Frowned upon, noticed, and remembered. The marble floor is cool under your sandals as you bow your head, murmuring words passed down for generations. Midday heat drives you toward the shaded colonnades and the cool interiors of the bibliotheca, the palace library. Scrolls are kept in neat cubbies, some wrapped in silk, others left open to air. You run your fingers along papyrus filled with histories, poetry, and philosophical treatises. It's easy to imagine Julia Domna, wife of Septimius Severus, here, surrounded by scholars, engaging in debates that might last hours. She was famous for her intellect, and some historians still argue whether her influence on imperial policy was greater in the library than in the audience hall. By mid-afternoon, You're ushered into the peristyle garden for light refreshments. Dates, honey cakes, and watered wine are served as a musician plucks at a lyre in the background. This isn't idle leisure. It's networking disguised as relaxation. The woman next to you might casually mention a friend whose son is seeking a military command. You nod, sip, and file that away. Palace memory is a weapon. The later hours bring preparations for the evening banquet. The dining hall is already being arranged. Couches draped with embroidered covers. Bronze oil lamps polished to a warm glow. Platters being assembled with roasted peacock, oysters, and exotic fruits. Your gown for the evening is laid out, perhaps in Tyrian purple, the color so expensive it was restricted by law to the imperial family. It's dyed from the glands of a tiny sea snail, each drop of pigment worth its weight in silver. A reminder, if anyone forgot, that you are not merely wealthy, you are untouchably so. As the sun dips, the palace begins to hum with anticipation. Musicians tune their instruments. The scent of spiced wine drifts from the kitchens, and servants glide through the corridors like shadows with trays and amphorae. You take your place in the triclinium, reclining on the left side as etiquette dictates, your right hand free to pluck delicacies from the table. Conversations weave in and out about harvest yields in Egypt, rumors from the frontier, the scandal of someone's cousin marrying beneath their station, and then a strange little custom. Perfumed oil drizzled onto your hands to be rubbed into the skin as both moisturizer and status marker. It's imported from as far as Arabia, a liquid that costs more than a soldier's annual pay. You can't help but wonder if anyone ever pretended to enjoy the scent just for appearances, because honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. The banquet stretches into the night, the glow of oil lamps making the frescoes flicker. Somewhere in the conversation, a casual remark is made about a governor's mismanagement of funds. No one reacts openly, but you can feel the ripple under the surface. This, too, is the daily life of an imperial woman, not just eating and being admired, but reading the air for shifts in political weather. By the time you retreat to your private chambers, the palace has quieted. Torches gutter in the hallways, and the marble floors have cooled again under your bare feet. Tomorrow, the whole cycle begins anew. The dressing, the meetings, the subtle performances that keep this marble kingdom spinning without a single crack showing on the surface. You close the carved doors behind you, the faint scent of frankincense still clinging to your gown, and step into the hush of your own domain. You wake the next morning with the lingering scent of last night's incense still hanging in the air, faint and almost sweet. The palace is quieter than usual, but you know that silence here doesn't mean inactivity. It's a different kind of busy, one you can't hear unless you're close enough to catch the whispers. And whispers are the real currency in this place. Servants slip in and out with trays of bread, figs, and honey, leaving without making eye contact. You've learned by now that they hear everything and tell nothing, at least not directly to you. Instead, a comment dropped in the kitchen might travel to a guard, then to a chamberlain, and finally to someone who just happens to casually mention it in the Empress's ear during an afternoon stroll. Historians still argue whether the most decisive political moves in Rome's imperial era were made in the Senate, or in hallways like these, carried on the breath of gossip. You step into a small solar chamber where the Empress and two noblewomen are already seated. heads inclined toward one another. You join them, reclining on a cushioned bench as a servant pours wine into shallow cups. The talk is light at first, about a shipment of pearls from the Red Sea, but soon it shifts. A senator's wife is concerned about her husband's rivals gaining influence. Another woman mentions an officer who has returned from the frontier with interesting news about troop movements. It's all wrapped in polite language, but you can feel the stakes pressing in. The Empress listens more than she speaks. When she does speak, her voice is calm, almost offhanded. Yet each word is like a carefully placed tile in a mosaic, forming a picture you only see later. She suggests that perhaps the officer's next posting should be closer to Rome. Just like that, a soldier's fate is sealed without a single scroll being signed. In the afternoon, you find yourself in a shaded portico overlooking the gardens. A court poet is reciting verses in praise of the emperor's military victories. You're half listening because you're watching a quiet exchange at the far end of the colonnade. Two women, one the cousin of a prominent general, the other a lady-in-waiting, pause in conversation just long enough for a folded scrap of parchment to change hands. It vanishes into a sleeve as quickly as it appeared. Was it a love note, a political bribe, or maybe just a recipe for better honey cakes? You'll never know, but in this palace, even recipes can start wars. A quirky tidbit: some noble women here kept pet parrots trained to mimic overheard phrases. Imagine a senator pacing in his garden, only to hear a bird shout, "The tax is too high," at exactly the wrong moment. Whether that ever swayed policy is doubtful, but it's the kind of thing that feels entirely possible in this atmosphere. Later, a messenger arrives from the imperial court beyond the city. He kneels, presents a sealed scroll, and leaves without speaking. The seal is broken, the contents read aloud. News of unrest in a distant province filters through the group, sparking debates about whether troops should be sent now or later. The Empress leans back, eyes half-lidded, listening to every voice without committing to a decision. You realize she's taking mental notes, sorting allies from opportunists. The sun dips lower, throwing long shadows across the marble. In a side chamber, you hear the soft clink of dice against a wooden board, ladies gambling for ivory trinkets while casually discussing which marriages might be advantageous this season. One suggests a match between a wealthy merchant's daughter and the nephew of a provincial governor. Another dismisses it, murmuring that the merchant's loyalty is questionable. And just like that, a man's lifelong business ambitions are quietly derailed over a game of chance. Dinner that night feels different. The laughter is sharper, the compliments more deliberate. You sit beside a woman known for her cutting wit, and she uses it like a scalpel, lightly, with a smile, probing for your opinions on recent events. Every answer you give is weighed. You can feel her mentally slotting you into a category: asset, threat, or harmless decoration. Later, in the candlelit calm of your chambers, you think about how none of these conversations will appear in any official record. No historian will find a scroll labeled Tuesday afternoon intrigue. And yet, it's in these small moments that power is actually exercised. The public sees marble and ceremony. Here, you've seen the machinery behind it, the constant calibration of loyalty and influence, the balancing act between appearing gracious and being unshakably in control. You lie back, listening to the faint sounds of the palace settling for the night. Somewhere beyond your walls, another whispered promise is being made, another subtle warning delivered. The empire doesn't run on speeches. It runs on conversations like these, spoken in low tones, over cooled wine, while the rest of the world sleeps. Morning breaks, with a pale gold light filtering through lattice shutters, casting patterned shadows across the floor. You rise slowly, the palace already breathing around you, guards changing shifts at the gates, kitchen fires sparking to life, and somewhere, faint strains of a flute echoing from the servant's wing. Today, you decide to wander deeper, beyond the grand rooms and ceremonial halls, into the places the public never sees. You begin in a narrow passageway lined with wooden cupboards, storage for perfumes, oils, and cosmetics too precious to leave in the dressing chambers. A servant lifts a lid to reveal tiny alabaster jars of saffron and cinnamon. Imported from far-off lands, these aren't just for scent. They're tokens of Rome's reach. Each whiff a reminder that the empire stretches farther than most of its citizens will ever travel. Historians still argue whether these exotic imports were meant to impress foreign dignitaries or simply indulge the private whims of the palace's most powerful women. The passage opens into a courtyard hidden behind high walls. Here, lemon trees lean over carved benches, and a small fountain murmurs into a shallow pool. It's the perfect spot for quiet reading, embroidery, or private conversation out of earshot from the marble corridors. A quirky tidbit: some palace gardens were known to keep small aviaries, not for songbirds, but for nightingales trained to sing at dusk, creating the illusion of a wild grove within city walls. You slip into a side building, low-ceilinged, warmer, filled with the scent of beeswax and parchment. This is a workshop, and at its center sits a woman bent over a wooden frame, weaving silk thread, dyed in colors so vivid they seem to glow. Some garments made here will be worn in public processions. Others will remain hidden in private wardrobes, a luxury reserved for the empress alone. The patterns are intricate: laurel leaves, winding vines, tiny dolphins leaping over imagined waves. You watch her work in silence, realizing that even the most intimate spaces in this palace hum with quiet artistry. Deeper still lies the bathing complex. Unlike the grand thermae of the city, these baths are reserved for the inner circle. You pass through a room of warm, dry air into the tepidarium, where the walls are painted with soft marine scenes. Shells, corals, mermaids with gentle eyes. The water laps gently against the edge of a marble basin, steam curling into the still air. Here, conversation is unhurried, the acoustics carrying even a whisper across the space. The empress might float beside a lady-in-waiting, discussing poetry or, more likely, the shifting loyalties of a governor in distant Gaul. From there, you explore the treasure room, a place rarely entered by anyone outside the family. Shelves hold ivory boxes, gold vessels, and jewels so large they look almost theatrical. Some pieces are diplomatic gifts. Others are heirlooms passed down through generations of imperial women. You pick up a cameo brooch carved with the profile of a goddess, its edges worn smooth by years of being pinned to heavy gowns. It's not hard to imagine it clasped at the shoulder of Livia or Agrippina, silently reinforcing the link between mortal ruler and divine presence. As the day drifts toward evening, you find yourself in a tiny study lit by the fading sun. Scrolls are piled on a low table, alongside wax tablets scratched with notes. The Empress sits here sometimes, alone, reading correspondence from friends in the provinces, or scribbling ideas for festivals, processions, and charitable works. It's a reminder that her world is not entirely gilded leisure. There is governance here too, woven between the silk and gold. By nightfall, the palace returns to its quiet hum. Lamps glow behind closed doors, casting golden puddles onto the floor. Somewhere in the distance, the last notes of a lyre fade into stillness. You realize you've walked through layers of this place: the public, the political, the personal, and each layer has its own rhythm, its own language of power and presence. The voice of the present is gone, replaced by a softer sound, the breathing of old walls, the whisper of forgotten footsteps. You are safe here, in this in-between place, where memory and dream overlap. No one will hurry you, no one will wake you. Let's step forward into the next chapter, waiting in the dark. We drift into the marble-smooth world of Rome's imperial women, slipping into the shadow of an empress as she steps into her ceremonial role before the watching city. The lamps are already lit along the streets. The air smells faintly of crushed laurel and roasting chestnuts. And somewhere in the distance, the murmuring crowd begins to swell into something closer to a heartbeat. You'll be walking just behind her litter. Don't trip over the hem of her gown. You probably won't survive that one. The litter rocks gently as it's borne along by 6 burly attendants, their arms gleaming with oil under the torchlight. Draped in purple, bordered with gold thread, the Empress doesn't so much glance at the crowd as let them drink her in, the way a priestess might let worshippers gaze at a sacred flame. In Rome, this isn't vanity, it's policy. Every sight of her, every flicker of silk, reinforces the image of an unbroken imperial order. A historian might tell you that these appearances weren't optional. They were a kind of contract between ruler and ruled. You pass under a triumphal arch, the marble catching the torchlight like a frozen wave. The crowd presses in, offering flowers, petitions, or just their craned necks for a better view. One old man shouts a blessing for her health. A younger voice mutters a complaint about taxes, because of course, someone always will. The guards are stone-faced, but you catch the corner of the Empress's mouth twitching in a ghost of a smile. At the forum, a festival is in full swing. The smell of incense mixes with the more earthly scent of grilled sausages. Children dart between the legs of soldiers, laughing, their hands sticky with honey cakes. The Empress descends, every movement deliberate, as though the very air has been rehearsed. She offers a libation at the altar of Vesta, the wine dark and fragrant, pooling briefly in the carved stone before spilling into the earth. Historians still argue whether she was genuinely devout or simply knew the optics. Either way, the crowd eats it up. A priest hands her a sprig of laurel, and she touches it to her lips before placing it on the altar. The gesture is ancient, symbolic of victory and divine favor. You notice that it's performed in slow motion, as though the world should have time to memorize it. This is the ceremonial face, the one that exists for the empire's eyes, as polished and unyielding as the marble statues carved in her image. At a chariot race, the Empress sits in the imperial box, the sun catching on her jeweled diadem. The cheers from the Circus Maximus roll over you like waves. She applauds when the blues win a heat, but doesn't betray more than a polite smile when the greens stumble. It wouldn't do to look too partisan. You lean in and notice something odd. She's holding a small pouch of dried rose petals, occasionally brushing them with her thumb. Later, someone will whisper that it's a charm against envy, a superstition passed down from her grandmother. It's not in any official account, but it feels more real than any carved inscription. You trail her to a temple dedication. The crowd hushes as she lifts a golden key to open the bronze doors. Inside, the cool air smells of fresh-cut cedar, the walls newly painted in deep vermilion. She steps back so the people can see the goddess's statue, unveiled for the first time. Coins clink into the offering bowls. Somewhere in the shadows, a scribe scratches notes that will become the official record. The day is long, but the mask never slips. Even when a sudden rain spatters the silk of her gown, she walks unhurried, head high, as though she personally ordered the weather. You catch yourself wondering if she feels the weight of it all, the endless eyes, the endless performance. But perhaps the point is that you never really know. By the time she returns to the palace gates, the torches are low and the crowd has thinned. The litter sways once more, bearing her inside, away from the public gaze. The doors close, and with them, the city's last glimpse of the ceremonial face until the next festival calls her out again. You stand outside in the cooling air, hearing the muffled sounds of the palace, wondering how different she looks when no one is watching. You slip inside the palace, the marble cool beneath your feet, the faint scent of olive oil and beeswax lingering in the air. Here, away from the roaring crowds and flaring torches, the Empress's public face softens, but her influence grows sharper. The palace is a hive of activity. Scribes scurry with petitions, courtiers cluster in quiet corners, and servants move like shadows, delivering messages wrapped in silence. You find yourself in a sunlit chamber where the Empress holds audience. A line of supplicants waits patiently, their eyes bright with hope or veiled calculation. The Empress listens to complaints about land disputes and requests for imperial favor with the kind of polite attention that can make or break careers. It's said that no senator would dare bypass her counsel. Her voice, though never raised in the Senate itself, resonates through its marble halls like a hidden thunderclap. A mainstream fact, Roman empresses often acted as patrons to individuals seeking advancement, using their networks to promote allies. Yet historians still argue whether their power was mostly ceremonial or if they truly shaped imperial policy behind closed doors. Today, she meets with advisors, men and women whose loyalty has been carefully cultivated. The conversation is laced with subtlety. A word dropped here, a hesitation there, shifting alliances woven like threads in a tapestry. You notice a quick exchange of glances when the topic turns to unrest in a distant province. The Empress's calm exterior belies a mind weighing options, knowing a single suggestion could redirect legions or spare a city from ruin. In a quieter corner, the Empress confers with her chief steward, discussing the arrangements for an upcoming festival. Details matter: the order of procession, the colors worn, the offerings made, because every nuance sends a message to the empire's eyes and ears. A quirky tidbit: some empresses kept notebooks filled not with poetry, but with detailed notes on protocol and court gossip. A kind of early power diary. Later, you observe a private meeting with a senator's wife petitioning for mercy for her family. The empress offers a gentle smile, but speaks with steely resolve. Mercy is a tool as much as it is a virtue, wielded carefully to maintain balance in the palace's delicate ecosystem. As the afternoon wanes, the empress retreats briefly to her private chambers to review correspondence. Scrolls from provinces, notes from allies, invitations to banquets and games. Each document a thread connecting her to the vast tapestry of empire. The weight of the empire may rest on the emperor's shoulders, but the empress's hands guide many of its finer movements. You step back, feeling the pulse of the palace's inner workings, where power is never loud but always present. A steady current beneath the surface of grandeur. The afternoon sun fades gently as you move through a lush garden courtyard, where marble benches nestle beneath twisting grapevines and fragrant orange blossoms. Here, away from formal chambers, the empress hosts gatherings of friends and confidants, women from noble families, poets, and diplomats' wives. This is where alliances are nurtured softly, with laughter and shared secrets. Far from the scrutiny of the Senate or the streets, you settle into a shaded nook, the scent of jasmine and fresh herbs mingling with the subtle clink of silver cups filled with diluted wine. Conversation drifts from recent festivals to whispered rumors about upcoming marriages and imperial appointments. You notice how carefully words are chosen, each compliment and jest a subtle chess move. One noblewoman praises a provincial governor's loyalty while casting a sidelong glance at another whose family's standing has recently wavered. A quirky tidbit: some ladies kept pet dormice as companions during such gatherings, small creatures pampered with honeyed nuts, reflecting the intimate, almost domestic side of these political salons. It's a detail historians love to mention to remind us that these gatherings were as much about comfort as strategy. The empress herself listens more than she speaks, but when she does, her voice is soft yet authoritative. She might praise a poem or offer a sharp observation on a courtier's recent misstep, shaping opinions with the grace of a conductor guiding an orchestra. Historians still argue whether these salons served mainly as social distractions or were pivotal in weaving the fabric of imperial power. You follow her to a private dinner in an ornate triclinum, where the conversation is both light and loaded. Topics range from philosophical debates on stoicism to subtle probes about factional loyalty. The meal is sumptuous: peacock, spiced dormouse, and honey cakes, each dish a display of wealth and empire. You try not to wince at the dormouse, but remind yourself that palate preferences vary widely across time. As the evening deepens, you realize that power here is as much about personal relationships as formal authority. Friendships become alliances, jokes carry warnings, and shared confidences bind an empire's fate in ways no public decree ever could. The palace settles into quiet twilight as you wander through its private corridors, moving away from the public glare into spaces softened by candlelight and velvet drapes. This is where the Empress reveals her hidden self, the woman behind the crown and ceremony, wrapped in solitude and secret rituals. You enter a small, dimly lit study where the Empress often retreats. Scrolls and wax tablets are strewn about, some bearing hastily scribbled notes, others carefully penned letters. Here, she pens correspondence that travels across provinces and beyond, communicating hopes, warnings, and alliances in carefully measured words. One letter lies open, revealing a beautifully composed poem praising a distant ally's loyalty. Words meant to nurture bonds that the Senate's records will never mention. A mainstream fact: Roman empresses were often literate and corresponded regularly, but historians still argue how much their writings influence policy versus personal matters. The lines blur, making the private political. In a nearby chamber, you find a small altar decorated with fresh flowers and votive offerings. It's a place of quiet reflection where the Empress performs rituals, lighting incense, whispering prayers to household gods and ancestors. A quirky tidbit: some empresses kept personal charms and amulets believed to protect against envy and illness, blending superstition with spirituality in a way that feels intimate rather than performative. As night deepens, you glimpse a rare moment of vulnerability. A sigh escaped during a pause in her writing, a hand unconsciously brushing a lock of hair from her face. She gazes out a window at the stars blinking softly in the Roman sky, perhaps pondering the weight of empire and the solitude it brings. This hidden self is layered beneath the public duties and courtly diplomacy, a reminder that behind every imperial image lies a person shaped by fears, hopes, and quiet moments of reflection. You step back, leaving the Empress to her thoughts as the palace breathes softly around her. Tomorrow, the ritual will begin again. Another day of masks, alliances, and whispered power in the Eternal City. It's darker now, but not the kind of darkness that hides things. This darkness feels like rest, like the pause before a deep breath. Your eyes grow heavier, your mind lighter, and the story folds itself around you like a blanket. Let's follow it a little further, while the night still holds. We step right into the warm glow of flickering oil lamps and the heady scent of spiced wine as you trudge through the bustling halls of Rome's imperial palace. Specifically, the grand dining room, where the Empress and her circle gather for banquets fit for gods. The air is thick with the sound of laughter, clinking goblets, and the occasional off-key lyre, all underpinned by a subtle, unspoken power play you probably won't survive if you don't watch your step. You enter the triclinum, a lavish room where marble tables gleam under oil lamps shaped like dolphins, their tails curved in eternal motion. The Empress reclines on cushions embroidered with gold thread, her gown shimmering with pearls and dyed purple, the color only the elite could wear, a symbol of imperial status and a reminder of Rome's vast wealth. Around her, senators' wives, poets, and foreign dignitaries settle into their places, the air buzzing with whispered conversations and the clatter of silverware. A mainstream fact here: Roman banquets were elaborate affairs lasting hours, often featuring multiple courses of exotic foods. Think flamingo tongues, stuffed dormice, and honey-soaked dates. Historians still argue whether these feasts were primarily about gluttony and display or served more strategic social purposes. Tonight, The menu is a parade of culinary extravagance. Servers glide between guests, carrying platters piled high with roasted peacock, oysters imported from the coast, and wine mixed with rare spices. You notice the Empress nibbling on a delicate slice of stuffed melon, her expression composed, but clearly savoring the flavors. Between courses, entertainers take the stage. Lyric poets recite verses steeped in mythology. Acrobats perform daring feats, and musicians coax haunting melodies from pipes and lyres. The Empress applauds politely, but you catch a flicker of amusement when a juggler drops a ball, sending a ripple of laughter through the room. A quirky tidbit: some imperial banquets reportedly featured vomitoriums, spaces where guests could discreetly relieve themselves to continue feasting. Although historians debate whether this was common practice or an exaggerated rumor, it certainly adds a vivid layer to the image of Roman excess. As conversation flows, you overhear debates on everything from upcoming Senate decisions to gossip about the emperor's latest military campaign. The Empress listens carefully, occasionally leaning forward to offer a well-placed comment or a subtle glance that shifts the room's dynamics. It's clear that beneath the glittering surface, this is as much a gathering of power brokers as it is a feast. The evening wanes, but the banquets rarely end before midnight. You recline on your cushion, watching the dance of light and shadow across the frescoed walls, the echo of laughter mingling with the scent of spiced wine. Rome's empire might stretch across continents, but tonight, all its strength feels concentrated in this room, where food and influence are served in equal measure. The palace corridors hum with a different kind of energy as you move toward the imperial baths, where the Empress prepares for her daily ritual of cleansing and leisure. The scent of warm water mingles with rose petals and a hint of myrrh, creating an atmosphere both soothing and charged with quiet significance. Here, in these steamy chambers, politics mingle with pleasure in ways the public rarely glimpses. You step into the caldarium, the hottest room, where marble benches glisten with moisture and the air hangs thick with steam. The Empress reclines, her skin glowing under the soft light filtered through alabaster windows. Around her, ladies in waiting attend with perfumed oils and scented sponges, ready to pamper and refresh. The gentle scrubbing is both literal and symbolic, a ritual cleansing that prepares her to face the day's challenges. A mainstream fact: Roman baths were not just about hygiene. They were social hubs where business, gossip, and alliances were forged. Historians still argue whether the imperial baths functioned more as private sanctuaries or as political theaters. You overhear a conversation between two courtiers discussing recent tensions in the Senate, their voices hushed but urgent. The Empress smiles subtly, knowing such whispers can ripple into decrees and alliances. In this misty sanctuary, every word counts. A quirky tidbit: some imperial women favored bathing in water mixed with milk or wine, believing it preserved youth and softened skin. Whether true or just luxury indulgence, it's an image of decadence that lingers. As you move to the tepidarium, the warm room designed for relaxation, you notice a small alcove where the Empress keeps a collection of scented herbs and exotic oils. Gifts from distant provinces, each bottle a reminder of Rome's far-reaching grasp. The baths continue, with massages and light conversation, blending leisure with subtle negotiation. A glance here, a whispered word there, shifting alliances like the water lapping at marble edges. You leave the baths, feeling the cool air hit your damp skin, the quiet power of this ritual lingering with you. In the palace's heartbeat, these waters flow, not just to cleanse, but to connect and command. The morning light filters softly through silk curtains as you find yourself following the Empress through her daily rhythms. Those small, seemingly mundane routines that shape the cadence of imperial life beyond the grandeur of public spectacle. Here, the palace hums with a quieter energy, and you become keenly aware of the patterns that structure her day from dawn to dusk. You watch as she begins with a modest breakfast, a bowl of fresh figs, olives, and barley bread, accompanied by watered-down wine, a far cry from the decadent banquets of the night before. It's a gentle awakening, but one steeped in ritual. Even the choice of foods speaks volumes about status, health, and taste. Historians still argue whether imperial diets were genuinely health-conscious or simply performative signals of discipline. Next, the Empress receives visitors in a small, sunlit room filled with blooming potted plants and delicate sculptures. Here, she listens patiently to envoys bearing news from the provinces, advisors offering counsel, and artists seeking patronage. Every appointment is carefully timed, every word weighed for its political and personal significance. A quirky tidbit: some imperial women reportedly maintained miniature libraries with collections of poetry and philosophy, reflecting an intellectual life often overshadowed by their public roles. These private collections were a quiet rebellion against stereotypes of idle luxury. As midday approaches, you see the Empress retreat briefly to her private chambers, where she practices calligraphy, her fingers tracing elegant Latin scripts on fine parchment. The act seems meditative, a moment of calm control amid the palace's swirl. Afternoon brings time spent supervising the palace's vast household, from the kitchens buzzing with activity to the artisans crafting jewelry and textiles. The Empress's involvement in these details isn't just about luxury, it's about maintaining the smooth running of an empire's nerve center. You notice her checking on a young apprentice embroidering a silk gown, offering encouragement with a rare, genuine smile. Evening falls with quiet dinners, shared only with close confidants. The conversations here are softer, touching on personal hopes, philosophical musings, and the occasional gentle joke that lightens the imperial weight. It's a side of her life invisible to most, a fragile balance of power and vulnerability. You realize that beneath the crown and ceremony lies a woman whose day is a mosaic of small decisions, subtle influence, and human moments that bind the palace and the empire together. As night drapes the palace in shadows, you slip away from the halls of ceremony and daily affairs into the private sanctuaries where the Empress allows herself moments of true solitude and unexpected habits. The world outside may never see these softer, hidden sides, but here, in these quiet rooms, she is more than a symbol. She is simply human. You enter a cozy chamber, lined with shelves of scrolls, small statues, and personal mementos, a refuge from the demands of court life. The Empress sits at a low table, carefully painting delicate scenes onto a small ceramic vase. The brush moves with practiced grace, each stroke a silent meditation. This quiet hobby, rare among her peers, reveals a contemplative spirit beneath the regal veneer. A mainstream fact: many imperial women engaged in artistic pursuits, from weaving to music and painting. But historians still argue whether these were mere leisure activities or subtle expressions of personal agency and identity. Nearby, a collection of exotic plants thrives in clay pots, some medicinal, others chosen simply for their scent or beauty. The Empress tends to them herself, her fingers tracing the leaves as she murmurs softly. A private ritual of care and calm. A quirky tidbit: some empresses reportedly kept small, unusual pets, such as tame monkeys or peacocks, not just as status symbols, but as companions in moments of solitude. You notice a small box of perfumes and unguents, the scents mingling from amber to myrrh, arranged meticulously. The ritual of choosing a fragrance is almost ceremonial, a sensory armor against the day's stresses. Later, she reads by candlelight, letters from friends and family, and occasionally her own poetry. These words are seldom shared, but carry the weight of unspoken thoughts and dreams, a whispered counterpoint to the public proclamations. As the night deepens, you glimpse the Empress's gaze through a window, resting on the star-studded sky, and wonder if she ever finds peace amid the palace's endless demands. In this stillness, history feels less distant, more tender, a reminder that behind every legend lies a heart quietly beating in the dark. The palace exhales into night, its grand stones softened by shadows and time. The scents of warmed oils and fading perfumes linger in the air, weaving through corridors now hushed and calm. Outside, the city's restless heartbeat slows, and stars blink softly through veils of olive branches. You breathe in the quiet, feeling the weight of centuries settle gently around you, like a comforting shawl. The Empress's world, once sharp and bustling, now drifts into a gentle haze, where power fades into whisper and ceremony dissolves into silence. The palace cradles you in its vast stillness, a timeless lullaby humming softly in your ears. You close your eyes, letting the night carry you deeper, where dreams and history entwine. It's safe here, it's quiet, it's time to rest.